This is episode 22 of the Discipleship Directives. This is a podcast with Dr. Dan Crawford. He is the founder of Discipleship, allnations.org. I am your host, Vidal, and I want to remind you also that Dr. Crawford is also, besides being the founder and president of allnations.org, he is also a senior professor emeritus at the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Thank you for joining us today. And Dr. Crawford, it's always a pleasure to see you, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. The weatherman says we're going to have storms, but I've got a nice dry office, so I'm good.
Well, and it's always good to see your office. It's always good to see your background with your books and a reminder of your journey that you are more than willing to come and bring us into that conversation of education and bring the collision of theology and pastoral ministry and everything that you do, which, by the way, speaking of which, today, speaking of education and speaking of your journey, today we have a special guest, and we're always honored. We're always excited to have a special guest. I do enjoy talking to you, Dr. Crawford, and just have our conversations that we do on a weekly basis. But when we do have a guest, we celebrate that. And I'm speaking to you of Dr. Joe Hernandez, and today is a special day. Dr. Hernandez, it's good to have you. How are you today?
I'm doing well.
Well,
Just excited about being with y'all today.
It's going to be fun. I promise you, it's going to be fun. We did talk a little bit before the recording, and I can tell it's going to be fun. So thank you for being with us. And, you know, typically there is some sort of a connection between our guest and Dr. Crawford's journey, which, you know, many years in ministry, but specifically when it comes to collegiate ministry. I'm going back into the years where, you know, he was leading student ministry as a pioneer in what now it used to be called Pan American University. And when I was in college, I still remember Pan American when I was in college back in the early 90s. And in your case, Joe, you have known Dr. Crawford for a while. And this is a podcast when we speak of primarily of discipleship. We speak of spiritual formation. We speak of, you know, just formation in general in our careers, in our ministries. Brother, for you, if you can take us back in your years of college, and especially my understanding that you were a part of his collegiate ministry back in Pan American, what comes to mind? I mean, here you are with Dr. Crawford after all these years. Take us back. What are some of the things that you remember from being under his leadership?
There is so much that Dan had to do with my development, you might say. In fact, I always kind of say that a major project that I later developed Southern Baptist, I said there were two men that were formative in my formation. One was the deacon in the Baptist church that I grew up in, and the other one was Dan Crawford. Both of them speaking into my life in different ways. But little did I know that the things that they impacted me were the things that made me, in terms of particularly in going into ministry. And when I came to Pan Am, I had there wasn't a single thought in my mind about me being in ministry in any way, fashion, form, other than just being a church member. And got to the BSU. My freshman year was kind of a little tough. We had gone through some family issues. And in fact, I was on my way to Baylor and ended up having to stay home. Immediately found myself the head of the household. So my first year, I didn't have time for BSU. I'd go occasionally. But between my freshman year and sophomore year, there was a major change in my life that God basically started bringing me into a path. And I think part of that path direction was Dan. And I tell folks, I said, of the many things that God has given me the opportunity to serve, there's some foundational pieces. One of them is a person of influence. The second one was the ministry task. And I tell folks, I said, if you want to look at anything that I have ever done in ministry, you need to look at three major pieces: evangelism, Bible study, and discipleship. And I said, and in all my areas of ministry since then, those have been the foundational places. And this I learned from Dan. And the person influence, I'm sorry for speaking that long, but this basically makes the foundation of who I was. One, he was the person who says, I think you can. I think you should. You will, kind of a thing. And so I'll identify myself as the head of the evangelism team. And we got involved in all the evangelism activities on campus and off campus, because we ended up having a little revival team that would go around to churches in the valley. Now, never thought of it. Now, Dan was the influence person, and here I had the responsibility, but I never led a person to the Lord. And so while I was in college, I also worked part-time, and I worked for the United States Department of Agriculture. And I said, Lord, here I've been put into responsibilities for evangelism, but I've never led anybody. And God provided that opportunity. And I remember the first person I led to the Lord, which was the farm manager at our USDA station. And I said, and that was the beginning. I mean, it was just like, it lit a fuse and it went. And that became a very much part of my life of what evangelism was. The things that then attached to that was the Bible studies. And once again, Dan said, I believe that you ought to. And I said, well, Dan, I'm too busy. He says, yeah, but this is what you ought to do. And so what he did was seeing me what I didn't see in myself. And to be able to encourage me, to be able to give me the opportunity and put me in charge. You know, who puts a young collegiate guy in charge? So I'm one of those guys that in terms of sports can take it or leave it. Now my buddy Dan lives by baseball. I mean, period. But I said, who you would not expect a science nerd, because I was a pre-med major, to be able to start Bible studies among the jocks. But we started in the dorms, Bible studies. I'm the least person, but Dan saw that I had a way to be able to engage people, and we started it. In relationship to that is obviously the disciple making. And I appreciate what you said, that the purpose of this podcast is to focus on the formations, on the discipleship. And so this is why I want, if you allow me this those three things are so pivotal, because once you hear what the things God led me to do, they're the things that laid the path for me to continue into those areas. And then that component of Dan being the person, he was like a big brother that I never had. And as a big brother, you learn the good things and some things you probably should have never done, and we'll never talk about those. But he was such an encourager to me, because I needed that in my life. And God provided him. And so my relationship with him went from Pan Am, as he then left. We would intermittently see each other, but I want to talk to you before I forget about it. I had the opportunity to be an instructor for a D-Min seminar that Dan was in. And so Dr. Anderson and I were teaching this D-Min seminar at Southwestern Seminary, and nobody knew that Dr. Anderson was not going to be there for the opening of the seminar. He was out of the country. So I was there. Of course, Dan didn't know my role in this. We happened to meet the rotunda, went to the seminar room, and when it came time to start, I stood up and I said, folks, my name's Joe Hernandez. You know, I'll be leading the seminar. Everybody, what? So introduce yourselves. Well, the last person in the circle to introduce themselves was Dan. And I would sit there and I was just smiling, because I knew what I wanted to say after he got through. And so Dan says, you know, I've been in student ministry and I've engaged young men and young women who God has used in tremendous ways, both in ministry or in church life and such. And so he said, they've done this. But this is the very first time I've ever had one of my students to be my instructor. And I sit there. So he looked at me and I just smiled. And as he said, Dan, I said, Dan, yes, all I'm going to tell you is going to feel good, because I still remember that Old Testament survey exam final that you gave us. It's going to be called Revenge.
I was going to ask you, did Dr. Dan pass the class? That's what I want to know.
Yes, he
Okay,
did. Yes,
okay,
he did. Yes,
okay.
he did. So that's Dan, and you know, I can tell you about the ministries, but he's been very instrumental. in my life. And when he came here to Atlanta to serve on the home mission board, I had a piece of my history join us. We didn't happen to be in the same section because he was in the evangelism and I was in the church planting area. But still, I had my big brother there. I just wish I had him there when I first came because I was the kid, because I needed my big brother to take care of me, defend me against everybody, the Southerners.
Well, listening to your story, and I did not have the pleasure to meet you before our podcast. I'm rehearsing in my mind as I'm listening to you. I'm rehearsing the word providence. I can see the providence of God working through, and obviously even before Pan Am days, which you haven't gone into that part of the story. But Dr. Crawford, this is such a familiar story when I get to meet people that have known you through the years, and especially that you were either pastor, student pastor, BSM, BSU ministry. In the Bible, in Joe, I don't know if you know this, as we, kind of our relationship and our podcast comes from, but Dr. Crawford comes on a monthly basis to South Texas, where you guys began your relationship years ago. Now he's coming back on a monthly basis to continue to do what he loves to do, which is training pastors. And a few weeks ago, Dr. Crawford, you spoke in the providence of God story of Abraham, in the place where he was willing to take his son to sacrifice his son. And there's a Hebrew word when it comes to the place as Jehovah Jireh. Mm-hmm. And you described, again, going back into your teaching, you describe of the plate, the title on the back of the name of a plate on your desk. I love for you to share a little bit more, expand on that subject.
Yeah, that started with a friend of mine, actually a former college roommate. I had a lot of roommates in 4 years, and this one didn't last long, but his name was Ray Hildebrand, and people my age would know him as Paul and Paula. Yes. He made a lot of money recording, and he was from Harlingen. And because he was from the Valley, and because he came back and forth, and I was doing the student ministry at Pan Am, I was able to get him to come and do a concert for us. And it was very informal. We didn't publicize it or anything, but he came and he played all these songs. And he told his testimony about how God had provided so much for him. And he kind of linked my testimony into his because we knew each other well. And he talked about Jehovah Jireh, God provides. And he said, I've written another little song, and he wrote hundreds of songs. Most of them never made it on the radio. This one was one of those. He talked about Jehovah Jireh, a living fire. And he said, no, that doesn't work. It doesn't rhyme. But anyway, he kind of played around with it. And the students picked up on it. And because he had shared that as a part of my testimony too, they made me a plaque for my desk. And this is what it said. If you walked into my office, this is what you saw. But if you were sitting behind, this is what you saw. And so it was a reminder. They wanted to remind me every day when I sat in my office and talked to students that God provided. So for all the years since, I have had that plaque on my desk, along with some more updated plaques. But that one has always been there as a reminder to me from the life of Abraham and through the friendship of Ray Hildebrand that Jehovah Jireh is correct. God provides. That's the background of that little story about the plaque on my desk.
And you have that plaque since when again? Remind me.
Oh, it must have been, so I went to Pan Am in 1967, so it was either late 60s or early 70s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. The thing, and Joe, I mean, again, just listening to your story, when I'm reminded with, such an amazing encounter with God between Abraham, obviously his son Isaac, and then the provision of God, undeniably, I'm reminded that 2,000 years ago, which we are only a few weeks from celebrating, our Easter celebration, Resurrection Sunday, is that on that Friday, when Jesus called upon the Father, he did not provide. He allowed him to go to the deepest of sorrow and darkness, and eventually he's going to die, which is the message of salvation, right? that the son is going to be abandoned so we can be provided, we can be rescued, and that's part of the reason why we listen to stories like Joe and the ministry that we're a part of it now with Dr. Dan Crawford. So we're blessed to do that. But Joe, coming back to the days of college and listening to the journey, I just wanted to ask you, just career-wise, brother, where are you? What are you up to now?
Just real briefly, what brought me to what I'm now. As I had said a little bit earlier, that my career path was to be a doctor, and coming back from a medical school visit, my last semester of college, driving down 281. You know, when you leave Falfurrias, there's not much between that and Edinburgh, and you're out there alone in a straight road. And I was praying, and this was late at night, and had a very strong sense that I was outside of God's will. And so as I continued praying, I said, God, are you telling me that it's not meant to be a doctor? He says, no, something else. That was a change. And not knowing what was the something else, just went on my impression. I've said two things I would never do: BSU work, student ministry, or to teach. Well, I learned you never say you never will, because the first step was to go into student ministry. Back in those days, we had a special program in Texas, and that's when I started working for BGCT. I'm an old employee of BGCT, and the program is called Student STS, and I was assigned to work in El Paso. And what's significant about that is UTEP is right on the border from my dorm window where I stayed. You look across Interstate 10, a railroad, and the Rio Grande, and you see Juarez. And so every morning, when I got up, I got to see Mexico. Got to see, and God used that experience there to show me what the path was. Because working with Dan, not only did we do the evangelism, Bible study, discipleship, but we'd have strong missions projects to nursing homes. But one of those was Gary Carpenter and I, Dan, were assigned to work way north of Edinburgh in a small little migrant community, and we lived in a little house that First Baptist Church Edinburgh had. And so we were the live-in missionaries. Well, neither one of us knew how to cook, so we nearly starved. And if it wasn't for the people in the community, we would have starved. But the effort was to start a Bible study and perhaps a small little mission there. Well, that was laid into my heart, because it wasn't the first time I'd been involved in that, because the other man in my life, Mr. Stowe, used to take me and his son as teenagers to start a small church further west from Rio Grande out in Roma. So church planting got into this mix. The significant thing about going to El Paso is that church planting was in the mix. And so God said, I got something else for you. So it was working on the border, because I would say it's taking a group of students into Juarez every Saturday, doing a Bible club. And I said, we need more than just a children's club. So we decided to start a church. This is La Carronifera. I don't know if it even exists today, but it's basically your shanty town, your little cardboard, corrugated metals, no water, in the poorest section of Juarez. And starting that in August, by Easter, we had over 100 people, all of them, the adults, all new converts. And we had a center block building that the BSU of Charlton State came and helped me build. So we took squatter rights. That church became the largest Baptist church in Juarez, because Bible study, evangelism, and discipleship. Like I said, this was ground into me. What else do we do?
Yeah.
Those three were the foundational things. But once again, you have to have somebody who kind of eggs you on, that pushes you, to put you in those areas of responsibility, and that allows you to grow and is there for you when you need. Well, back to why there. It was while I was working on the border that God showed me what my purpose in life was. Now, this is 74, long time ago. But God showed me that we needed to have a way to be able to equip those people that God calls to be able to reach the lost and start churches at wherever they are in life. The traditional path was for what of like us to go to college, go to seminary, go from there and get the degrees. But other men and women coming that God calls to serve come in a different kind of process. But my task was to equip those he was calling to be able to serve and start churches by reaching the lost. That was my purpose. That then brought me to Southwestern. Did my MDiv, did my PhD. While there, I started 2 churches simultaneously. A Spanish-speaking church. Back then, it was just purely Mexicanos. That we didn't have Central Americans in Texas much at all, or anywhere else. Mostly just Mexicanos. And I started the first English preference Hispanic congregation simultaneously, not together in the same facilities. And that was, as far as I know, that was the first expression of an English preference Hispanic congregation.
Yeah.
Distinction about that is, in both groups, the people that were made up were not believers. Once again, evangelism, Bible studies, discipleship.
Right.
So I didn't know anything about gathering people. I knew what it was to bring them to the Lord and then grow them together. And so that was still within me, that calling to prepare those. Then you probably, in Texas Baptist, in the legacy of it, two key people, Oscar Romo and Josue Grijalva. And both of them have long passed, but both of them were the older men in my work. Oscar was the one that brought me to Atlanta because he had asked me, what do you envision God doing with you in your life? Well, I had a clear thought, and I said, God's calling me to do. And he looked at me and said, so how would you do it? I said, well, it's never been done before, but what I envision is such, which was the creation of what back then was called the Ethnic Leadership Development Program, which later then became the Contextualized Leadership Development, to be able to pick up a person wherever they were in life, education prepared or not, to be able to give them a path by which they would equip themselves with the basic skills of Bible knowledge and practical ministry skills. And so we started it with Golden Gate Seminary and extended to several other seminaries. That was back in 81. It still continues.
Wow.
Golden Gate and New Orleans are the only 2 seminaries they were the first ones, and they still have continued. And if you look at the expansion of the work, not only among Hispanics, but with several Asian groups, American and Native Americans and others, it was that first effort to do something other than a non-credit certificate, though that was one of the entry points. And so I developed a stair-step process. Understand, I'm a science person. I know how to create things from it, and it worked. And I said, so can you imagine a young Latino guy with a freshly minted PhD coming into the academic deans and say, this is what God wants us to do? But I had Oscar Romo and his backing up. I had the president of the Home Mission Board backing me up. And at Golden Gate, I had Bill Pinson, another Texan, who was president. And he says, Joe, I see that. Let's do it. And several others, let's do it. And it worked. So that was my starting at the Home Mission Board. I stayed at the Home Mission Board from 81 through the end of 96. And in that, new responsibilities, once again, in the equipping of people. Became the assistant vice president for church planting with 2 major areas: leadership development or church parent training and strategy development. Because once again, I said, if it doesn't exist, how can we do it? How do we create it? And so multiple projects that were developed. And the one great thing is, like Dan, I had somebody who said, I think you can I don't know how to do it, but go do it. You figure it out. Tell me how it works.
Yeah.
That happened again at the Home Mission Board. Oscar says, bringing you in, it doesn't exist. Figure it out. Tell me how it works. Charles Cheney, who was the vice president, said the same thing. We don't know where it is. Figure it out. Tell me how it works. Well, that's a key thing in ministry. And I don't know that we have that enough. And you can imagine if every single pastor looked at it within their churches and said, you ought to, you will. Go do it. And just let it go, let it go, let it go. And I tell folks, I said, what's the best example of letting it go and letting somebody else to develop? I said, how can you see that in real? I've had the occasion of 2 times of being supervised by somebody who I brought in as an associate.
Okay.
Now, how often does that happen?
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, it happens because you let go.
That's right.
Let them grow.
That's
Let them be able to do everything that you poured into them. And then let God, as God works with them, adding even more. And then I become the mentee, the person who they mentor. That discipleship to the disciple person,
right.
And the discipler person, what are the roles reversed? We don't have near enough of that. So retired twice from NAM.
I've heard that before.
I taught him how to retire also.
Another
commonality between the two of you.
Yes.
Yeah.
The first time I retired, I was told, says, why in the world would you leave a high position, go to a small missions organization and raise your support? And I said, well, it's not the first time I've heard God said, I have something else for you. Mm-hmm. And I was faithful. That's another part of the discipleship, is the obedience part. And once again, it changed my course in 74. And they said, change my course again in 2006. Are you familiar with the Bible study method called Discovery Bible Study?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm the person that conceptualized that.
Okay.
Once again, what's the major component? Bible study.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bible study, which teaches in obedience, which is the discipleship, which then leads the person to discover God, and then comes to fully be part of the family of God by accepting Christ. Once again, the fundamentals.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they track them. And so when David Watson and I were working on this, I had no clue where it was going to go. But one thing I did know is that we want to make it so simple that nobody makes money on it. It becomes completely reproduced, and let's see where it goes. Little did we know.
Well, it seems to me, Joe, let me rephrase this, because it seems to me that the foundation was placed on your early days. And I'm going back to Pan Am, when you were under Dr. Crawford's leadership. And as much as he poured into your life and the life of his students, eventually became something organic that just became a lifestyle. And then through the stories that you're narrating to us and sharing with us, it seems that foundation was either reproduced or was expressed in different scenarios, seeing the same non-negotiables of that discipleship component, just contextualize, and again, seeing the result. I mean, listening to you, I didn't know that you used to work for BGCT. I'm going full circle because I get the privilege to be a part of BGCT now. And I've been in El Paso multiple times and working with churches over there. I haven't done anything with BSM at BGCT. But anyways, I just see the connection over those things. Dr. Crawford, just listening to the timeline and seeing Joe's, journey, I'm sure that you've been aware of some of those changes, maybe not as in the detail that he's given us today, but let me ask you, Dr. Crawford, do you have any of those memories back in the Pan American days, Edinburgh, Texas, what is it, late 60s? In that time that you were down here, what do you remember, especially for my brother Joe?
And Joe was involved in this. There was a young girl, I think her name was Maria. I'm not real sure of that name, but she became a believer. And we had gone to a state meeting somewhere, probably Dallas, and they'd loaded us up with a whole bunch of paperback New Testaments, Good News for Modern Man. It was a black and orange. They looked horrible. Looked like you give away at Halloween or something. And it said, take these and give them to students. Well, I had boxes of these things, and what am I going to do with these? Joe was in charge of Bible studies at that time. This young lady came in my office. She said, can I have some of those Bibles to take to my youth group? And I said, sure, you can have all you want. So I gave her a box and she was gone. A week later, she's back. Can I get some more of those? We need more. I gave her another box. This happened 3 times. She carried 3 boxes of books out. And the next time she came in, I said, I'm getting curious now. What's going on? She said, well, our youth group meets on Sunday afternoons, and we'd like to know if you could come and answer some of our questions, because we don't know what we're reading. And Sister Ann doesn't know what we're reading. I said, whoa, time out. Sister Ann. I don't think I know Sister Ann. She said, well, she's in charge of our youth group. And I said, I don't even know where you go to church. And it was the large Catholic church in Weslaco, still there, right off of the expressway. That was the church. And I found myself for the next, 6 or 8 Sunday afternoons, sitting in a room with 100 teenagers, answering their questions and watching Sister Ann over in the corner, just totally bewildered. She didn't know what was going on. But this one girl that became a believer as a part of Baptist Student Ministries, took the Bibles and gave them to her friends, and they were all studying Good News for Modern Man in the New Testament. And I was trying to answer their questions. And Joe, I don't know how much in the process of that he was, but he was very much a part of. Just another example of what you can do in collegiate ministry. I'd like to know where that young lady is now. She's probably pastoring a church somewhere. But she wanted to remain Catholic. That was an interesting part of it. She says, because all my friends are Catholics and I have my best chance to share Jesus with them than I would if I were to join a Baptist church.
Needless to say that this is South Texas, so Catholicism obviously, is going to be prevalent and continues to be prevalent down here. Although, and I don't have to tell you, neither one of you guys nor our viewers this, but things have changed a lot, as you guys know. Even the understanding of being a Catholic or even an evangelical, things have changed a lot. And the beauty of our conversation today, which is coming to an end, unfortunately, because we're enjoying ourselves a lot, in a time where change has become normative, and tragically, not all of the change is positive, but this is the world that we lived in. The beauty of our conversation is in a lot of these changes, we come back to the non-negotiables. Jehovah Jireh, he is a provider. He is a good God. The foundations of discipleship. After all these years, Brother Joe, they still work. I can tell you, we as as a family, we got 3 college kids, and I can assure you, they still work. Those spiritual formation components, the basics of following and loving Jesus in the context of community, listening to the voice of God, and simply responding to the call, which has been the invitation from day one for our podcast. Joe, I want to thank you, brother, for being here. Thank you so much for giving us of your time. Dr. Crawford, we haven't talked about this, but I'll just say it right now. We got to bring some of our guests back to the podcast. Mm-hmm. So, Joe, if you stay tuned, brother, we'd love to have you back. In the next episode.
And you haven't heard because the latest I'm doing, which is very different, but still the major foundational pieces are there.
Definitely.
We'll have you back.
Definitely. Love to have you back. Thank you for being with us today, Dr. Crawford. Always a pleasure to see you. Love for you guys as you connected today to the podcast, especially if you make it to the end. Love for you to give us a like, to give us a rating, whatever you're watching or listening to the podcast. And as your grace abounds from the Lord, would you share this podcast with somebody if you found it helpful? We'll see you guys next time. And thank you for joining us today. God bless.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you. This is episode number 3 of Discipleship. This is a Directives podcast and Dr. Crawford. I'm here this morning. Dr. Crawford, how are you?